So the CBI has launched the report, Our Public Services. We've been discussing that, and with me now, just to answer a few more questions on it, is Stella Creasy, who is Shadow Business Minister. So Stella, the report sets out 3 challenges, the first of which is about the challenges of living with an ageing population, how you reform public services to deal with that, and specifically living within our means. Now, is a Labour government prepared to meet the CBI target of not spending more than 38% of GDP?
So the report sets out a series of fiscal measures, one of which is saying the 38%. I think all of us will be wary about saying that that is always going to be the only target that we would have. And I understand where it's come from because there's lots of international evidence on it. But we've also lived through a last 5 years of some very, very volatile economic conditions in which actually some fiscal flexibility in our rules has been really, really important. So I think what the CBR is saying is you need fiscal discipline. Absolutely, we get that. Labour is very committed to balancing the books. Ed Balls has absolutely said no new borrowing. But how you do that and how you respond to the world as it changes is something also I think the CBI would expect of us. I was quite surprised to hear them also talking about linking both capital and revenue spending within that target. And I think there's a different argument to be had about the difference between being able to manage public finances in terms of revenue spending and where you're going to look to invest to save.
So you'd like more freedom to up investment spending?
Well, I certainly think there's a different case in terms of capital spending, and I suspect most CBI members would get that. But I think it's right that CBI is saying, look, what are the fiscal rules, and is there a difference between the 2 political parties that are going to contest the next election? You know, is there going to be a different argument about the way in which you manage public finances? We are certainly very clear that getting debt down and dealing with a deficit is part of good governance, and it's the start of the process, not an end in itself, because actually the way that you deal with that is you reform public services.
And what about the ageing population? Because the CBI is quite clear that health and social care budgets need to be merged to deal with that. There needs to be really radical reform. Yeah. Are the political parties ready for such a radical reform, and will the public stomach it?
Well, Liz Kendall is already ahead of the CBI in that because she's been talking about integrating health and social care for some time, because we recognise actually if you've got families and elderly people trying to deal with several different agencies, sheltered housing, social workers, hospitals, MAPS, doctor and CCGs, that's a huge amount of time and effort and resource, and it doesn't result in necessarily very good care. So there are good reasons in terms of service quality, let alone the fact that it's a very, very expensive system to keep running. I was a bit disappointed today to see Jeremy Hunt talking about, oh yes, you know, we need to have a better care process, but talking about 4% of the healthcare budget being integrated rather than actually looking at how you could have integration across the piece. That's certainly where Labour is going with this.
But all the parties are sort of inching towards a consensus on merging health and social care. Do you think, after the election, if Labour was in power, would the other parties back this?
Well, I would hope so, because we'd have won an election on the argument that merging health and social care was a really important thing to do. So, I mean, we've made it a very clear pledge that we see both the value for money and the value for the patient case for integrating health and social care, and that's what we're looking at and how you do that. So the question for us is the scale and pace of how you make it happen rather than whether it's the right thing to do.
Let's look at the second challenge, how you make public services fit around people's lives, going digital. You're a bit of a social media whiz. How far do you think public services can go in delivering online? Give us an example of where you can be really radical on this.
Look, there's huge potential. There's lots of different projects already, sort of local authorities running hackathons, for example, sharing all the data they have with local users of services, technical experts and council officers to reconfigure how they use the services. But underneath all of that has to be a cultural change that says, actually, we want to work with the people. And what I've tried to set out today is what we mean by people-powered public services. Because just being able to choose between pretty core options isn't the same thing as actually having the power to say, no, we want something different and we're prepared to put our money behind it. We want to see a much greater use of direct rights for the public to be able to shape services. Online technologies allow that to happen in a much more cost-efficient way, but you've got to have that culture that says, actually, we want to empower people first and foremost.
You know, there are a lot of silver surfers, but there's a lot of elderly people who aren't online. You don't want to leave them behind with these reforms, do you?
Absolutely not, but there's also some fantastic developments, for example, in healthcare, where people are managing their own health and using teleproducts to be able to do that, and being able to interact with their doctor online, essentially, to look at their care and manage their care. So I reject the idea that this is all about an age. I think it's about the type of technology and how you work with the user, how you have advocates who help them see the benefits for it.